Hello everybody. Today I am talking about some of the varieties that I grew in my garden this year. I don't know if you are aware or not, but there are over 3,000 named varieties of tomato. And this year I grew 10 different ones. Some I've grown before and others were new to my garden. So I wanted to give you a little insight as to what I thought about each one. First of all, the way we decide on how we evaluate our profile of flavors is based on how the tomato tastes fresh. To give you an example, there's an Italian type of tomato. It's called San Marzano, and it's okay as a paste tomato, but when you cook it, it really shines. So, but we are evaluating these strictly on fresh taste. And when we're looking at that tomatoey flavor that most people like to call it when they're thinking about a good variety, it's a balance of sweetness or sugars and also acid. And we want to get to about 50-50, which is considered ideal for tomatoes. Also, another thing that will determine how you like a tomato is the texture. How does it feel in your mouth? And that's something that's highly individualized. And what I may like, you might not like at all, and vice versa. So another thing is the visual appeal. Is it an attractive tomato? And not thinking about things like growth cracks, which can be considered, or the overall color, because for instance, I'm not all that attractive to yellow tomatoes, but I'm getting better at that. And also we look at flavor, and that can be highly variable depending on who you are. There are some tomatoes that are award-winning tomatoes that I don't particularly care for, but my wife really enjoys, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is one called Big Beef, and it's a big beefsteak type tomato. It won an All-America Selection Award back in 1994, and it's been one of my standards in the garden. And it's one of the most popular red tomatoes in North America, and the fruits can be anywhere from 8 to 12 ounces. And it grows on what we call an indeterminate plant, which means it'll continue to grow until it's frosted. So a plant like this may grow to be 6 to 8 feet over the course of the season if you have it staked up and you're not pruning it. Very dark red fruits, and they are slightly sweet, so I don't particularly care to use them in salsa. I don't like my tomatoes sweet in salsa, but it's great for making tomato soup, and I have a great recipe if anybody wants it. I got it from a farmer's wife when I worked for UniversityExtension. It's about 73 days, so it's not a real long tomato, and that's from transplanting. And it has multiple disease resistant, like verticillium, which is a soil-borne disease, Fusarium races 1 and 2, and tobacco mosaic, alternaria stem canker, and a number of other things. So that's Big Beef, and I'll continue to grow that one. The next thing we have is Brandywine. Big Beef is a hybrid, fairly new. Brandywine is an heirloom, and an heirloom, this particular heirloom, dates back to 1885, and it's a potato leaf tomato. It tends to be a little bit more susceptible to disease, and it bruises easily, but it has very nice flavor. It's not a dark red, it's more of a pinkish beefsteak type, and it's considered among one of the best tasting tomatoes out there. It has what's rated as outstanding flavor. High acid variety, and they can get up to 1.5 pounds, and I have just a single tomato on the plate here. It's also indeterminate. It can reach 9 feet, and it harvests anywhere from 80 to 100 days, so it does take a little bit more time, and as I mentioned before, it is more disease prone. Now, another one that I grew for the first time this year is called Solano, and Solano was an All-America Selection grape tomato that was selected for 2020. And it is semi-determinate. In other words, determinate tomatoes grow up to a certain point and terminate maybe 2 to 3 feet. Semi-determinate means it'll get a little bit larger than a determinate type. As I mentioned, it's a grape type, very sweet. If it matters to you, when they measured the sweetness level, it was bricks of 9, and that's quite high for tomatoes. And it's early, about 60 to 7 days. But the fruit weighs only about 3/4 of an ounce, and it grows in clusters. And those clusters can be quite large. And of course, grape tomatoes are very high yielding, So most people only need one unless you're going to a farmer's market or something. This is also a good tomato to grow in containers. The next tomato is also an heirloom, and we've grown it in our garden for a number of years. This is one of my wife's favorites. It's not necessarily one of my favorites because of its color. It's called Cherokee Purple, and it's a variety that dates back to the 1890s, and it's said that this one was passed down by Cherokee Indians from generation to generation. It will grow all over the United States, and it's thought to have originated in Tennessee, and in a lot of flavor tests it is rated one of the top varieties for flavor, and it has a dark dusty rose color with some green tinges in the shoulder. They're very sweet and have a rich, almost, people describe it as a smoky flavor, but when I tasted one a little while ago, I didn't detect the smoke at all. But again, that's the difference between how different people taste things. The fruits are about 8 to 13 ounces, and this one is about 80 to 90 days, also on a indeterminate plant, so it's going to get quite large. The next one's early grow. You can get this from Burpee or Park or whatever. It's one of the earliest tomatoes of the season. It's only 50 days, so if you just can't wait for tomatoes, this is one that you might want to grow. Also, you can plant this one in midsummer and still get some, and when I say midsummer, I'm talking about early July. You can still get some fruit going into the fall when most of your tomatoes are toast from diseases. By the way, I do have a video on some of these tomato diseases. And the fruits aren't very large, they only get about 6 to 8 inches. And again, this is an indeterminate vine for early grow. Okay, our next tomato is called Invincible. It's a saladette type tomato, and they're fairly blocky and elongated and smooth and firm. The fruits are uniform. They weigh only between about 3.5 ounces apiece. Deep red inside, and it's a heavy yielder, intermediate resistance to gray leaf spot, early blight and bacterial wilt. And this one is fairly short. It's about 65 to 70 days.